Now here again is Will Willimon. I suspect your students at Duke over the 20 years you served there would grumble a lot at that parable.
I remember I preached years ago on that parable, and I came out of Duke Chapel, and this student, a young woman, was standing there, and she said, where do you get these stories that you use in your little talks? And I said, stories? I guess growing up in South Carolina. And she said, well, I was really offended by the one today. And I said, offended? And she said, yeah, that's not the way to treat people. The people who've worked all day should get more than the people who just showed up. And I said, that story's not original with me. I said, what's your church background? I was just praying she wouldn't say Methodist. And she said, Presbyterian, sort of. And I said, well, just for your information, the man that told that story was later murdered for telling it. We really didn't like that story.
A very great man used to write in parables. But you retell Jesus' parable in the context of personal gain. Your example of the student who wanted the A and so on. Let's take it to a different level. Corporate, political gain in the market culture in which we reside. Unpack that for us.
I think we do live in a, as you said, market culture in which you get what you work for, you work for what you get. I mentioned in the beginning about this. It's interesting, lately I hear a lot about, you deserve it, you deserve this, you worked for it, you earned it. Christians schooled in stories like this one keep trying to understand that no, it's a gift, and I really haven't earned it or gotten what I deserved. God is, as the Scripture says, kind to the ungrateful and the selfish, which is me.
You know what was interesting to me that you mentioned, Will, was this idea of us playing the judge or wanting to play the judge. How do you think perfectionism factors into that sometimes when we're going along and thinking we're doing God's work, but we're really tough on ourselves in those times?
I know perfectionism has not been my sin. Sorry if it's yours. But I think sometimes we forget how really odd it is to have this God who comes to us in Jesus Christ, who says, I've come just for sinners. That's all I'm here for, is just sinners. That's how you qualify for just to be an honest to goodness sinner. And we get confused into thinking that basically religion is about really being a much better person rather than sort of open-handedly receiving that grace. And Augustine said one time, sometimes we sin even against Sunday by turning Sunday into just another day of work.
But how do you read the Bible? I mean, wouldn't you agree that God has a preferential treatment for the poor? And Jesus is not too nice on rich people, like me. But some have said maybe one reason the poor come across as particular recipients of God's grace is that they are reminded daily of their need, of their dependency. And once again, in our culture, dependence is an ugly word. Most of us never want to be dependent on anybody, even though we are constantly in ways we refuse to acknowledge. And maybe you could think of like being a Christian as sort of training and learning how to be dependent and learning to admit my need, which is so often covered over by my affluence.
And it does go to the point, too, what you kind of mentioned that we want to think that if we put in enough time, enough quantity, that it's going to equal quality. But that's certainly not the case in our relationship with God, is it?
No, I think we put in time and effort in our relationship with God the way we put in time and effort in any love relationship we're in, a marriage or whatever. And I think, one problem in that the poor have always suffered is the notion that you're in the circumstance you're in because of what you've done or not done, and I'm in the circumstance I'm in because of what I did, and so if you find yourself in a condition of poverty, it must be because you've done something wrong. Well, the Bible really works against that and gives poor the dignity of being special objects of concern. And the rich, at least in Jesus, have special responsibilities because of the material gifts they've enjoyed.
As bishop of the United Methodist Church for Northern Alabama, Will, what have you learned about this whole question of justice and systemic problems that you see from your perspective as bishop?
One of the great things about being a place like Alabama is that we really got caught in a vast systemic generational injustice with racial segregation and oppression. And I say that's a gift because it's one thing Americans are not that good at is admitting we've done wrong. Again, it's kind of wonderful. Gary Wills said some time ago, if you're a white male Southerner over 50, there's no way I can convince you people can't change because you've experienced such radical change in your own soul, in your own family. And that's why being in Alabama is sort of fun to realize how much change has happened. A lot more change needs to happen. But I keep telling my churches, it's no small thing that Christians gather on a weekly basis and on most Sundays stand up and say, we're wrong. We did wrong. We are wrong. That's not something that sort of comes with being an American, it appears, but we're pretty defensive that we're right and we mean well and what we do turns out well, and so.
Are you seeing that open up in some of the churches in terms of social justice activities and more of a consciousness to be involved and help in that way?
Yeah, Alabama is one of the poorest states in the country, so that does mean that you got a higher percentage of people who've either been in poverty or been in poverty recently enough to remember what that feels like. And I was at a church not long ago where the pastor was saying, he said, we've had the most wonderful ministry among the homeless and all here of feeding. And he said, because I've got about half a dozen people in this church who are old enough to remember what it was to be hungry at a time in their lives, and they are incredibly generous. He said, one of my people has said, if you know of anybody in this town who needs food, you tell me, and you do provide it for them, and I'll pay you because I know what a horrible thing that is.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Will. We appreciate it.